Once upon a time, there were two sisters. Their names were Snow White and Rose Red. Snow White had hair as black as night. Rose Red had cheeks as red as roses. They lived in a small cottage. The cottage was in a big forest. The sisters loved to play in the forest. They picked berries and sang songs. They made friends with all the animals. The forest was their magical playground. They were happy in their little home. Snow White and Rose Red were not just ordinary sisters. They were inseparable. Every morning they would wake up to the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, and it felt like a living, breathing entity that welcomed them with open arms. The sisters would often venture deep into the woods, exploring new paths and discovering hidden clearings. They would gather wildflowers, their favorite being the delicate bluebells that grew in abundance. One day, as they were wandering through the forest, they stumbled upon a small, sparkling stream. The water was so clear that they could see the pebbles at the bottom. They decided to follow the stream, curious to see where it would lead. As they walked along the bank, they noticed a family of deer drinking from the water. The deer were not afraid of the sisters. In fact, they seemed to recognize them as friends. Snow White and Rose Red watched in awe as the deer gracefully moved through the forest. The sisters also had a special bond with the birds. They would often sit under a large oak tree and listen to the birds' melodious songs. Sometimes the birds would even perch on their shoulders, as if sharing their secrets. Snow White and Rose Red would sing along, their voices blending harmoniously with the birds' tunes. As the seasons changed, so did the forest. In the spring, the forest was a riot of colors with blooming flowers and fresh green leaves. In the summer, the forest provided a cool refuge from the heat. In the autumn, the forest was a tapestry of red, orange, and yellow leaves. And in the winter, the forest was a wonderland of snow and ice. No matter the season, the forest was always a place of beauty and wonder for the sisters. Their little cottage was cozy and warm, with a thatched roof and a garden full of herbs and vegetables. Inside, the walls were adorned with handmade decorations, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread. The sisters took care of each other and their home, always working together in harmony. Snow White and Rose Red's bond with the forest and its inhabitants was unbreakable. They knew every tree, every rock, and every creature that called the forest home. The forest was not just a place to live, it was a part of their very being. And in return, the forest seemed to protect and nurture them, providing everything they needed to live a happy and fulfilling life. The sisters' days were filled with joy and adventure, and their nights were filled with dreams of the forest. They knew that as long as they had each other and their magical forest, they would always be happy. One cold winter day, there was a knock at the door. The wind howled outside, and the snowflakes danced in the air, creating a magical yet eerie atmosphere. The cottage was nestled deep in the forest, far from many other homes, making the knock even more mysterious. Snow White and Rose Red were scared. Who was it? They had been told stories of dangerous creatures that roamed the forest during winter. Their hearts pounded as they tiptoed to the window, their breath fogging up the glass as they tried to see who was outside. They peeked out the window. It was a big brown bear. The bear's fur was covered in snow, and he looked cold and tired. His eyes, however, were gentle and pleading, not the fierce eyes they had imagined a bear would have. The bear said, "Don't be afraid. I am lost and cold. Can I come in?" His voice was deep but kind, and it resonated with sincerity. The girls had never heard a bear speak before, but something about his tone made them believe he meant no harm. The sisters felt sorry for the bear. They opened the door a little. The cold wind rushed in, making them shiver, but they couldn't leave the bear out in the cold. They hesitated for a moment, looking at each other for reassurance before opening the door wider. They let him inside. The bear sat by the fire. The warmth of the fire quickly melted the snow on his fur, and he sighed in relief. The girls watched as the bear's demeanor softened even more in the cozy environment. He warmed himself up. The sisters gave him some soup. They had made a big pot of vegetable soup earlier, and they ladled out a generous portion for their new guest. The bear lapped it up eagerly, his eyes closing in contentment with each sip. He ate it all gone. The bear was very kind. He thanked the girls with a nod and a gentle smile, his eyes twinkling with gratitude. The girls felt a warmth in their hearts, knowing they had done a good deed. He was not scary at all. In fact, he seemed like the friendliest bear they had ever met. The girls realized that sometimes the scariest-looking creatures could have the kindest hearts. They decided to let the bear stay with them until the storm passed, and in that time, they formed a bond that would last a lifetime. The bear stayed with the sisters all winter. They played games, they told each other stories. They became the best of friends. The bear was like a big furry brother. One day the snow started to melt. Spring was coming. The bear said, "I must go now. I have to protect my treasure from the goblins." The sisters were sad to see him go. They would miss their friend. One day, the sisters were walking in the woods. They saw a tiny man. He had a long white beard. His beard was stuck in a log. "Help me!" cried the tiny man. The sisters pulled and tugged. Finally, they freed him. The tiny man was a dwarf. He was not very nice. He grumbled, "You should have been more careful. You almost ripped off my beard." The sisters were surprised. They had never seen a dwarf before, especially one who looked so grumpy and ungrateful. They had always heard stories of dwarves being jolly and full of cheer, but this one was different. His face was etched with lines of discontent, and his eyes were filled with suspicion. The dwarf was not very grateful. He grumbled and muttered under his breath as the sisters helped him. But they were kind-hearted and didn't let his attitude deter them. They knew that helping others was the right thing to do, regardless of how they were treated in return. They offered him food and water, and even tried to make him smile with their cheerful chatter. They knew they had done the right thing. Their hearts felt light and their spirits were high. They believed that kindness was its own reward, and they were content with that. They hoped that, in time, the dwarf would come to appreciate their help and perhaps even become a friend. They saw the dwarf again by the river. He looked even more distressed than before. His clothes were torn, and he seemed to be searching for something. The sisters watched him for a moment, wondering if they should approach him again. They decided that they couldn't just leave him in such a state. He was about to fall in. The sisters gasped and rushed forward. The dwarf had lost his balance on the slippery rocks by the riverbank. He flailed his arms, trying to regain his footing, but it was no use. He was going to fall into the cold, rushing water. They grabbed his hand and saved him. With a great effort, they pulled him back to safety. The dwarf was wet and shivering, but he was alive. The sisters wrapped him in a warm blanket and sat with him until he stopped shaking. They didn't expect any thanks, but they hoped that he would at least acknowledge their help. "Thank you," grumbled the dwarf. His voice was low and grudging, but it was a thank you nonetheless. The sisters smiled at each other, feeling a small sense of victory. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They hoped that this was the beginning of a change in the dwarf's attitude, but he didn't mean it. His scowl returned almost immediately, and he turned away from them. The sisters sighed, but didn't let it dampen their spirits. They knew that change took time, and they were willing to be patient. Another time, a wild boar chased the dwarf. The sisters were out gathering herbs when they heard the commotion. They saw the dwarf running for his life, with the wild boar hot on his heels. The sisters didn't hesitate. They grabbed sticks and stones and ran towards the danger. The sisters scared the boar away. They shouted and threw stones, making as much noise as they could. The wild boar, startled by the sudden attack, turned and fled into the forest. The dwarf was safe once again, thanks to the sisters' bravery. The dwarf did not even say thank you. He just ran away. The sisters watched him go, feeling a mix of frustration and pity. They wondered if he would ever change, if he would ever learn to be grateful. But they didn't regret their actions. They knew that they had done the right thing, and that was enough for them. One day the sisters saw the dwarf again. A big eagle was flying away with him. "Help me!" cried the dwarf. The sisters threw stones at the eagle. The eagle dropped the dwarf. He landed safely on the ground. Poof! The dwarf disappeared in a cloud of smoke. In his place stood a handsome prince. "Thank you," said the prince. "I was under a spell. A wicked witch turned me into a dwarf. She made me unkind. Your kind hearts broke the spell." The sisters were amazed. They had rescued a prince. The prince told them more. He said, "My friend the bear also tried to help me, but the witch turned him into a bear." Just then, the bear came out of the woods. He had heard the prince's voice. "You're back!" cried the bear. He ran to the prince. Poof! The bear turned into another handsome prince. The two princes were brothers. They hugged each other tightly. They were so happy to be together again. The princes were grateful to Snow White and Rose Red. They invited the sisters to live with them in their castle. The sisters said goodbye to their little cottage. They rode away in a carriage. They were going to be princesses. The sisters loved living in the castle. They made many new friends. They were always kind and helpful. The princes learned from the sisters. They became kind and just rulers. Their kingdom was a happy place. Everyone loved Snow White and Rose Red. They were the kindest princesses in the land. Snow White and Rose Red taught everyone an important lesson. They showed that kindness is powerful. Even when people are unkind, we should be kind. Kindness can break spells. Kindness can change hearts. And kindness can make the world a better place. The end.